Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this Textile Talk podcast. I'm Gail Cowley, and I'll be your host today. Joining me is the wonderful textile artist Salley Mavor. Just to give you a little bit of background on her before we start our chat, Salley has spent over 4 decades honing her signature style and working methods, carving out her own niche within the children's book world and the fibre art community. She creates three-dimensional, hand-stitched artwork with fabric, found objects, and a unique combination of embroidery techniques that she's developed during her career. A combination of storytelling imagery, extra attention to detail, fervent craftsmanship, and the use of familiar yet intriguing materials set it apart. Her pieces are presented as tableaus, like miniature shallow stage sets, with scenery, props, and characters assembled in shadow box frames. Her scenes have been used as children's book illustrations, social commentary, and stop-motion animation. As an illustration student at the Rhode Island School of Design in the 1970s, Salley left traditional mediums behind, preferring to communicate her ideas with sculptural needlework. Salley has illustrated 11 picture books using her distinctive blend of materials and hand-stitching techniques, including Pocket Full of Posies, which won the 2011 Boston Globe Fawn Book Award. Her popular how-to book, Felt We Folk, is in its 2nd edition, inspiring creativity in all ages. The picture book, My Bed, Enchanting Ways to Fall Asleep Around the World, is her most recent publication. She works in her home studio in Falmouth, Massachusetts, and that's where she'll be joining us from for the episode today. So thank you so much for joining me today, Salley. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm just thrilled to be able to speak to you and to tell your audience about my artwork, which I've been doing for a very long time, and hopefully inspire others to find their own way to communicate what they're feeling and thinking about.
So I wonder if the first thing that I could do would be to ask you to tell us a little bit more about yourself. And because, of course, we know you from your art, but we don't know what led up to that. And I'm sure it's been a fascinating journey. So if you could tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to stitch art, that would be wonderful.
Okay, I'll start at the very beginning, which is my first conscious memory, which would be probably watching my mother sew. She was making some doll clothes for my older sister, and I was probably about 4 years old, 5 years old, sitting on the couch, and I can remember it vividly, just being so intrigued with what she was doing. She was hand sewing, sitting there on the couch. And from then on, I have lots of memories of making doll clothes, making these little outfits for my little troll dolls, figuring out ways of sewing on a snap, and sort of strategizing. How do you sew a snap on? Do you go from hole to hole, or do you go from hole to the outside, to the fabric? I mean, just little things, little details like that. And my mother would help me. My grandmother would also help me, and she introduced me to the thimble at a very young age. She must have had some old thimble that fit an older, small lady, so it was more appropriate for a child to use. And she would show me how to thread a needle and how to do basic embroidery stitches, a chain stitch and little daisy chain, that kind of thing. And I just loved it. So I did a lot of crafts in my younger days. My mother was an artist, and she always had something going on. I mean, my mother's philosophy was, I realize that now looking back, is the reason you get up in the morning is to make art. I mean, for her, that kept her going.
How
Yeah.
wonderful.
I mean, that's the kind of environment I grew up in. It was very positive. Art was important. It just was. I mean, we did a lot of dancing and music. That's how my family participated in our community was through the arts. And my parents gave so much to our little community. And that way, they're just revered. They both passed away 20 years ago. And I remember, I just am so grateful to have had that kind of a childhood and my siblings as well. So it really did start in childhood, but I didn't really start doing embroidery and sewing for my art until way later in art school. I had been through, I mean, I played with dolls up to age 13, maybe even older than that. And it was a secret from certain friends. Some friends just loved it. They would come over and they were into it too, and my sister as well. But I just felt like it was for children. This little playhouse doll thing, that was for children. Now I was going to be a real artist. I was going to be a fine artist. So I did all kinds of drawing, painting, printmaking, and when I went to art school, I majored in illustration because I wanted to communicate. I wanted to do narrative art. I wanted to tell a story. And that was really the only department where I could, in the 70s, that I could do representational work, and it could be any medium. It didn't have, you weren't sort of caught in sculpture or printmaking or jewelry or pottery or it's glass blowing. It was just totally open in illustration. Your point was to convey a message. So I did the usual drawing and painting for my assignments first when I first started in school. But I always had on the side, I always had some little project I was working on, something I was sewing, something I was making, because that's what makes me happy. And I would bring these things into class, the portable small things. And so while the class was going on, we would have these just interminably long critiques, which were very boring to me. And to get through it, I would bring in handwork. So I was working on making some little pins, doing the hand sewing, and my teacher came up and was wondering what I was working on. And she was so intrigued. She said, Salley, you should do this for your illustration. Just start sewing your illustrations. I mean, and she gave me permission to just delve into three-dimensional interpretations of the class assignments. And I could really do anything I wanted. It was totally open. So I started making these scenes with dolls. I also had backgrounds that I would set up. And I felt like I was liberated. I felt like I could fly. And like I had been set free to become the kind of artist I was meant to be. And it really took this teacher sort of saying, it's okay, it's all right. I mean, to do
Isn't that great though? Because
and
not all teachers are quite that supportive, are they?
yeah, right. And it also worked out for me because I'm sort of I do things my own way. And I've never taken an embroidery class or a fiber art class of any kind. And I think I would be a terrible student. I would resist doing it the right way and want to do it, differently and try this or try that. And some teachers would be okay with it. Some teachers wouldn't be. And I just have experimented and tried things out on my own. All these years, I've just figured it out. And that's part of what keeps me going. That's part of what I enjoy because I am letting my body and my hands sort of guide me. But I also have the background of an art education, which I think is very important in terms of learning design, composition, color, the basics, which hold a visual interpretation, whatever it may be, it holds it together. And so I have learned how to do that through all the classes I've taken, all the different mediums I've worked in. It all comes down to design and having something that will draw the audience in. And with my illustration work, that is especially important. And with children's illustration, it should be simple, but in my philosophy, things should be simple enough for you to just look at it and sort of know what it is, but not so sure. And then you draw, and it draws you in, and then you can pick out the details and see what the story is. But you have to be invited in. And that's what I have been working on all these years. So that's a long explanation of how I got into it.
No, it's really interesting. And it's really interesting to hear how you feel that your design training, I think it was the Rhode Island School of Design, wasn't it, that you went
Yes.
to?
Uh-huh.
And how much of that has fed through into the work that you currently do.
Yeah, just communicating with people in social media, my followers. I have a lot of quilters, embroiderers, craftspeople, artists of all kinds. And it's a range of people who some people only use patterns or go by drawings, and they feel, from what I hear and what they say, it sounds like they don't think they can do anything beyond that. They like bring their own design into it. And others are doing their own thing.
It comes down to confidence, I think, as well, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
It is it's not like they can't do it. They think they can't do it. And maybe they had some kind of a negative experience when they were younger and think that they're not creative, or they can't come up with ideas. And I try to encourage people to do just a little bit and change things. Maybe you can use a pattern, but change it, adapt it, move things around. So I try to be encouraging that way.
I think sometimes people are so underconfident, and it's strange actually, because it's underconfident on actually designing rather than the technical side of making, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's something about, maybe if we feel we can't design something that's really original, we feel very exposed in a way that we don't if it's just, I can't do that stitch, or I can't figure out that technique.
Yes, yes. Oh, you got it. It's
Mm.
the textiles, the needleworking things that are out there of all kinds. I mean, it's like technique is first and foremost in a lot of people's minds. It's like they're trying to attain some level, and also proficiency, and it's almost like there's a checklist of stitches. Do I know this one and that one and the other thing? It's just a totally different way of approaching making art. And for me, it's totally alien. I come from a place where it's like it's all coming from inside me and out. And I'm not that interested in learning techniques, or just because it's a technique. I mean, there's so many different stitches, and I don't even know their names. And I've come up with some myself and then find out, oh, that's a stitch that somebody else made, hundreds of years ago. But I figured out something myself. So it comes from within. It's a way of expression for me. And it's like there are just a few. I do like maybe 6 tops of stitches, and then sort of variations of combinations of those. And that's basically what stitching is anyway.
Because actually you can always, personally speaking, I certainly don't know all the stitches out there, not even a very small fraction of them. If I want to look at something, I can go to a book and find a stitch that I think might work and try it out.
Yes, I think that's what's great about it. And I've certainly done that. I have this kind of I've written about it because I've found that this is a good opportunity to talk about teaching and sharing knowledge. And I've thought about this so much and written about it on my blog because I am approached all the time by people who want to learn some of my techniques, and they're curious if I do workshops in teaching, and come down to where I have to kind of explain myself because so many people in this field do teach, and that's one way of making money. And because the work is so time consuming and intensive, it's very hard to get paid for your labor. So there's lots of other ways of making a living, if at all. But
yes, easier ways possibly.
Right. But it's also a way for people to get together and share something. So it has so many values around that, and community-wise. But I have felt that I've tried it. Early on, I tried teaching, and what I found is that I could do the first few hours just fine. But after that, I'm really jealous of the other students because they are sitting there working on things, and I have to be the teacher. I have to, walk around and help people, and all I want to do is sit there and make things myself. And I'm sure that other teachers have this experience too.
Yes, I'm sure they do.
And I think that just personality-wise, I mean, I know I can do it, but I'm too much of an introvert to do it for any length of time. I mean, I could do it, but it's too exhausting being around people and sort of playing that role. And I just want to retreat into my little projects and stitching.
Do you know, I am so glad to hear you say that, because I think that's how I felt for most of my teaching life. So thank you for making me feel better about it.
Okay. And it just makes sense because this kind of an activity does attract a certain kind of person who's more quiet, methodical, and detail oriented. And they're sort of getting into it like a meditation. So yeah, that's so I realized that early on and decided that I'm just not going to teach.
No, it's not
And,
for everyone, I don't think.
yeah.
And also, it's a bit of a management exercise, isn't it? Because you have to deal with all of the different people and personalities.
Yes.
So it can be quite challenging, not always in a good way, to be honest. Attention textile art lovers, it's time to mark your calendars for the Knitting and Stitching Show at Harrogate Convention Centre from the 21st to the 24th of November 2024. This is the must-attend event for anyone passionate about textile crafts. And if you're tuning into this podcast, you won't want to miss the textile galleries. These galleries showcase some of the most innovative and inspiring textile art exhibitions from top designers and artists across the UK, including the likes of Harriet Riddle, Jessie Chorley, House of Quinn, and many more. But that's not all. This event offers hundreds of workshops, live demonstrations, and over 150 exhibitors featuring the latest tools, products, and materials for your next creative project. Whether you're just starting out or a seasoned professional, there's something here to inspire every maker. And here's an exclusive offer just for you. Use the discount code SST when you book to save on your tickets. simply head over to theknittingandstitchingshow.com/Harrogate/SST to secure your spot. So once again, that's discount code SST at theknittingandstitchingshow.com/Harrogate/SST. And we'll also pop those details into the show's notes for you so you have them to hand. So don't miss the UK's biggest and best textile craft show, the Knitting and Stitching Show at Harrogate Convention Centre from 21st to 24th of November. We can't wait to see you there.
Could you tell us, Sally, a little bit about the design process that you go through? Because I assume that when you're thinking about a new piece, that you would probably begin by putting that down on paper. How does that work?
Yes, I mean, for me personally, there's some different things that go on. So if I have a book, like a children's book, so I've looked at the manuscript, I have gone through it over and over, and while I'm reading a manuscript, I visualize what might a picture be for each sentence, each verse, or each paragraph, depending how long the story is. And if I can come up with sort of clear, not detailed, but sort of strong elements in a picture, then I feel like I can do it. And so if I can't, then I'm not going to do that story.
Yeah.
So that's the start. So then once I realize that, okay, I'm willing to do this, I'm excited about it, I want to bring this story to life through pictures, then I've signed the contract, and I will start with doing thumbnail sketches, really tiny, 2 by 3, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Double page spreads, very simple drawings. There's also a spine in the book in the middle, so you have to, what they call the gutter. So you can't put anything important in the gutter in your design. You also sometimes have to leave space for words to be printed. So your designing is all about making it into what will be a book. It is not making just a piece of art that will go on the wall. So I can do that because I was an illustration major in art school. So I've learned about how to do that. So for that kind of a thing, that's how I will start. I'll do these small sketches, and then they will kind of get a little more detail, but nothing, no color, just lines. You're basically sort of mapping out where the characters are going to go, what the larger elements are, and then all the details can come later. And then I will blow them up and show the editor and see what she thinks. It's usually a she. And then sometimes I have to make changes, but usually not. I think the editors I've worked with trust me, and they don't really know what it's going to be until the end. It's just, so that's how I do a children's book. But for other art that is just standalone pieces, usually I will imagine this piece for a long time, months, percolating.
Yes, yeah.
in my head, and I will, and it's all about basic design, because if I'm going to have a tree or some sort of focal point, some kind of angle, it's got to be some kind of drama.
Yes.
In what I'm imagining. And then I can sort of add stuff to that later. So it has to have a basic design element. And then I will start doing sketches and develop it. But it always changes. It changes during the process of making it. And for me, that is so important. It's like, that's why I work in 3 dimensions, and why I work with all these different parts that are isolated, that can be shifted and moved around and sewn in different ways together in the end, like puzzle pieces that can be put together differently, because I'm not sure what it's going to be like in the beginning. It's like I can't do a grid at all because that means you know exactly what it's going to look like and you're just sort of filling in, coloring in. But for me, part of what keeps me interested is being able to play with it and move things. And it really goes back to playing with dolls and doll houses. Because I mean, that's really what I'm doing. I have set my life up so that I can still play with dolls.
That's wonderful.
Yes.
I love it.
I'm just yeah. And when you're an older woman, it's you can admit things like that. You can say things like that. But when I was a teenager, it was much too self-conscious to say that I still like playing with dolls.
Yeah, of
But,
course.
so
Mm.
but so my work really has so many different elements to it. It's got the dollhouse element, it's got the embroidery,
Yeah.
miniatures, children's book illustration. So I've never really known what group I'm in, but that's okay with me because I'm kind of a lone wolf kind of person.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just doing my thing,
Mhm.
and whoever wants to come on board and check it out, then that's great.
I, I mean, I would imagine that doing all of the illustration for a book must take, well, actually translating that, I should be more specific, translating that into thread and fabric must take a huge amount of time. I don't know if you've ever worked out how long.
Oh, well, I don't do hours. I don't do hours. I mean, okay, we'll start by saying I work all the time. My
Right.
my husband says, if somebody's asked him, he says, "Well, when she's not sleeping or eating, she's working in her studio." That's not far from the truth, but it's my passion. This is what I do. And so it's I work 7 days a week, but
Wow.
I I go to an exercise class every morning. It's just other things that I do to make sure that I'm healthy. I do pay attention to my husband,
Mm.
and my family, and I'm a new grandmother, so that's sort of
Oh,
come in.
congratulations.
Thank you. Taking, some of my attention away from my art in a good way. But I think in terms of months and years with a project. So for a children's book, it takes between 2 and 3 years to do
Wow, that is
all the
a
work.
serious amount of time that you have to allocate, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. It's a big commitment. So I have to really want to do it. To
You
really,
really do, yes, to be
really,
involved with something for
yeah.
that long.
Yeah. And so it can't just be any old story. It's got to fit somehow. And it's sort of like I have to fall in love
Mm,
with the characters that I'm creating and and really so I can really care about them and and show what their life is like. And so that's what fuels me, keeps me going, keeps me attentive. So I'm never bored doing it.
no.
And there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of it's very, very time consuming. But and people ask, they say, well, do you listen to books on tape or podcasts while you're working to pass the time? And I'm like, pass the time? I don't feel like I'm just passing the time. It's like I can't listen to anything with words while I'm working because it's too distracting. I have to pay attention to what I'm doing because it's always new. It's never the same old. I'm figuring out what I'm going to do next, a couple of steps down the road. And I have to devise things. I have to figure out how to do it. I've never done it. A lot of the things that I start. I have this vision of what I want to show, but I'm not sure how it's going to come out. And it evolves and I work it through. And that's why it's good that it takes so long because I can work through it very methodically and figure things out. And if I have to rip it out, that's fine. And just start over. And that's what I love about needle and thread.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I'm assuming that there's nothing that could really sort of financially recompense you for the amount of time that you spend on it.
I have been able to make some money. My goal right now is not to lose money. And so it's like, because other people in the arts understand that.
Yeah.
When you have your materials and your transportation and the shipping and all that. But with the children's books, I've done about a dozen, and most of them are out of print. Children's books are famous for not lasting very long.
Mm.
And my last two books are still in print, and I'm so proud of that.
Oh, wonderful.
And so I receive royalties for that. When I'm working on it, I get an advance that goes toward my royalties. So I do make money doing that. And I have other products that I use my images in. I have jigsaw puzzles and cards and posters, and I have a little shop, and I sell things. So, so I do make some money. I don't sell the original pieces anymore. I used to. I sold a lot of pieces and realized a few years ago that if I kept doing that, I wouldn't have anything left to show in exhibits. I have been invited to do large exhibits over the last few years and had to borrow pieces from collectors who had bought them. And it's it's complicated to do that. And I sometimes don't really like to take them away from people. Some of these people who have bought my pieces have had them for 40 years. I mean, they bought them when we were both a lot younger. And
Yeah.
they are elderly women who just love them. And I don't want to have to take them away from them for 6 months or something. They should have them. So I decided not to sell things and hold on to what I have so that I can have these exhibits and share the original work with a wider audience. And not everybody can come to these shows. I mean, they're in the US. They're usually in a place that is not too far from where I live on Cape Cod. I mean, right now I'm having an exhibit in Albany, New York, and they came and picked it up with a van and picked up stuff and brought it out there. So the shipping is a big deal. And so I show where I'm invited to show.
Yeah.
People say, "Can you come to, you know, Albuquerque, New Mexico," or whatever. And I just say, I would love to, but I need somebody to invite me who has the funds to make it happen. It's so I'm very lucky in that a word has gotten out about what I do, and when people see it in person, it's a totally different experience than seeing the printed
Oh,
reproduction.
I'm sure, yes.
But I'm really glad to have both. I'm really glad to have the ability to share my work with the world through the digital mediums and printed mediums. And then there's a second life where the original art is shown.
And your website is wonderful. I mean, you've put so much
Thank you.
onto there so that people are able to share, even if they can't actually attend an exhibition, but they can. I do appreciate what you're saying, that you don't get any idea, or you only get a partial idea, perhaps, of how big the pieces are or how intricate, but it's still better than not being able to see them at all. And I think your website's wonderful. There's just
Thank you.
so much variety and colour and so many wonderful pieces there.
Thank you very much. I really have enjoyed that aspect. And some artists just do their art and they stay sort of in their own cocoon. I've felt like I stay in my own cocoon too, but
Mm.
I do like communicating. I do like sharing. And I do like talking about this art and bringing it out into the world. And through the blog, I've been able to do that. And it's just, that's one wonderful thing about the web, I think.
I was wondering, I mean, I'd love to ask you about the sort of the techniques that you use, but before I do, I was just wondering, do you think of them as being stump work, or would you have another name or another description for the pieces?
So that word, stump work. So it was thought up by who knows who way back when, and well,
Mm.
and so they didn't have a committee to show the name to for their branding.
No, that's true. That's very true.
And early on, when I found out about stump work and thought it was fantastic, and I just loved it, but I really wasn't interested in making stump work that in the way that I saw it done. What I loved about it was the three-dimensional aspect of it
Yes.
and the relief of it. So I kind of took that concept and made up my own way of presenting it. So I do use the word stump work in certain audiences. Most people have no idea what it is and they go, "What?" So I've been calling it from maybe 40 years ago. People say, "What is this stuff you're doing?" And I knew that I was not going to use stump work. It was much too homely a sounding name.
Yeah.
And so I called it fabric relief. And I don't know if that's any better, but that's what I've been calling it. And these days, I just call it art. I find that using these sort of textile terms makes people think of something else than what it is. They have
Yeah.
their own idea of what embroidery is or fiber art, and I don't want them to get caught in that having that image in their head. I just want it to be more open. And so it's been a challenge
Mm.
all these years.
I thought it was quite interesting that I actually bumped into, completely by chance yesterday, our own stuntwork tutor, Karen Quickfall. And I mentioned to her that I was speaking with you today. And I said, Karen, if you don't know Sally's work, you really must go and have a look at it. So I sent her the link to your site last night. And she got back to me this morning, really, really enthusiastic and really excited about it.
Oh wow, it's great.
And she just said, I think because during the course that we do on stunt work, which is only quite a short one, we do incorporate it in some of our longer ones, but we do ask the students to make a piece of their own devising. And I think just the thought that there's somebody there that is doing such innovative work that we can sort of say, go and have a look at Sally's work because it's just so different, it's so innovative, it's so unusual. And sort of just to get extra inspiration for what they're doing. But no, she was very excited about it, and I'm
Oh,
not surprised.
that's wonderful.
Mm,
Thank
but
you for doing that. I feel that I've been doing this stuff for 45 years or something, and maybe and it seems like just now I'm getting people are finding out about what I do, you know, in the I mean, people have known about it for a while, but in the embroidery world, in the English embroidery world, which, as you know, it's very, very big, an important part of English culture,
mm,
and it's a wonderful resource. And so, I mean, it's just I just love knowing that that's happening.
yeah, no, it's definitely happening.
That you are doing what you're doing.
Yeah,
And I'm very excited that your students and your faculty will be finding out about what I do and hopefully using that as examples for their
yeah.
students.
Oh, I can absolutely guarantee it.
Great.
So, so Sally, could you tell us a little bit about the actual fabrics and threads that you use? Do you change around a lot, or do you tend to go back to the same sort of threads and fabric each time? How does that work for you?
Well, I'm kind of I'm a collector, and I have a lot of stuff, uh, all different kinds
Yeah.
of things, and I've latched on. Maybe the last 25 years, I've been using wool felt for a lot of what I do, and it's natural dyed, plant dyed, and I used to buy it from now defunct cottage industry, and I luckily knew that they were not going to be doing it anymore, so I bought them out basically. So I have a lot of felt. So I have the supply. I use that. I use all kinds of miscellaneous fabrics that somehow speak to me. But my work is small, so I do not need very much of it. And I could take some piece and use it over and over, little cut out little pieces, and
Yeah.
always be there. I use old things that were my grandmother's. In my children's book, My Bed, I use this linen, this very roughly woven linen that my grandmother had as curtains, and somehow my mother kept them, and I saw them and said, I mean, this fabric, you're like, what would you ever do with this fabric? I don't know, but I have lots of it. Uh, and I'm so glad I did, because it was perfect for a tatami mat in the Japanese scene. And just linen tablecloths, napkins, upholstery fabric. I love upholstery fabric. It's richness. I use that for borders. So if I see some kind of a pattern I like, I buy the minimum, which is usually a yard, and just have that forever. And so in terms of fabric, it's don't use that much of variety. I don't think I'll ever have to buy another piece of fabric. And threads, I use DMC floss. I've always used that. I've never felt the need to try other things. I'm sure there's lots of choices. I don't really have brand loyalty, but maybe I do. Maybe I do to DMC, because that's what I've always used. I try different thicknesses of threads. I don't even know what the company's names are. Whenever I see something, it used to be that you can go in a shop and see things and touch them, but those shops, mostly in my area anyway, have gone out of business, and you just buy everything online now. There's lots of things available, and so I don't really need that much choice. It's not so much about the thread for me.
Yeah.
It's more about the colors, the design, the how things all fit together, and the thread is used as how it's how you join everything together.
Okay.
I don't use glue. Everything is sewn together. I mean, I do use glue occasionally when something else doesn't work.
Yeah.
And in terms of needles, people say, what kind of needles? Ask me about that. I say, I have no idea what these needles are. I've had them for a long time. I got a bunch from my husband's aunt's stuff when she died. You know how all these women have drawers full of old,
Oh, yes. Yeah.
they're just, and you go through them, and so there's lots of needle type things and sewing supplies, and I don't know how many old sewing boxes I've inherited, and these needles will last. And so I don't have to buy needles either.
Mm. They
And
they must have made them better in those days, because
yeah,
I must admit, the modern ones, I tend to use a chenille needles quite a lot, and the modern ones I turn black within quite a short period of time.
really? Huh.
Mm, whether it's something in my skin that affects the plating, I don't know, but I certainly find I buy a ridiculous number of sewing needles.
And I mean, I do use a thimble still, an old, just a cheap thimble, nothing. And I I know that a lot of people don't. They don't know how to use it, or it gets in the way. But I've used it all my life and I cannot sew without a thimble.
It's very hard on your hands to sew without a
Yeah.
thimble, isn't it? You have to develop almost a hardened skin at the end of your fingers in order
Yeah.
to do that. Mm. What sort of things? You obviously must use a lot of things for padding underneath and to raise your embroidery away from the surface of the fabric. What sort of things do you use for that?
Well, probably early on, I probably used some sort of fiber-filled type thing, but I've gotten more away from the synthetics, and I use wool, wool fleece, layers of felt, and this is where I could start talking about felt and felting. People ask, do I make my own felt? No, I don't make my own felt. I I make things with already made felt.
Yeah.
And as far as felting, the verb, I have done some needle felting, very little, and incorporated it because it seemed like that was the best way of achieving what I envisioned.
Mm.
But there's something about needle felting that the poking of that needle over and over, I just feel like I don't like that experience.
Yeah.
And there's also the look of needle felting. Everything has the same texture.
Yes. Yes, that's
And
true.
it's like when I look at pictures of needle felted animals or this and that, it's very hard to distinguish the artists who made them and to have their personality and their design sense come through, unless it's very, very distinctive some way. I I find that it's too homogeneous,
Yes.
and it's all sort of this sort of fuzzy texture. And for some things that will work in my artwork, but I'm not really attracted to it.
Yes. Yeah. I could certainly see, I suppose, for attaching things to a background, there might be a point at which it could be useful. But yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a very repetitive thing to do. And I gather that it causes people a lot of problem with their shoulders as well. So
Oh,
um,
okay.
I've heard from a couple of people that have ended up with a frozen shoulder by doing it too much, which I could see actually from because it's a very repetitive motion, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and somehow I have managed to do all of this sewing and what I would say is repetitive, but I don't use a hoop. I just do things in the air. I mean, it's
All
like
right.
because I'm working on a very small piece, like 3 inches, and you can't put that in a hoop.
Mm.
And so I've gotten used to just doing things that way, and my wrists are always moving around in different
Yes.
angles. I'm never holding it in the same angle or my fingers. So my hands are very healthy. They feel the same as when I was 20. So I don't have any arthritis issues, thank goodness. But I know a lot of people do experience that, and that I find very sad. So I think that I don't know whether it's just the way your body is built and your genetics or the way you hold your hands that can help
Mm.
you stay healthy.
I can certainly see why you would want to work on the small pieces such as small leaves or figures in sort of not in a hoop, but when you come to put everything together, because your pieces all look beautifully straight. So I'm assuming then do you change to something that stretches the background?
Yes, so at the very end, I will stretch a piece of fabric over a picture frame, a wooden
Yeah.
picture
Hmm.
frame, and or stretcher, and stretch it around. And so I would use probably a cotton muslin type of fabric to do that. And that's the base. That sort
Mm.
of keeps things and make it very taut. And then on top of that, I will sew the different parts of the background on that. So that's really how it all stays together and it has structure
Yeah.
and stability.
And I don't know if that's the way you feel about it, but is that one of your favourite parts? Because you must see everything that you've worked on for so long really starting to come together and work as a whole.
Yes, I do. I write. I really like that. It's sort of like coming into the home stretch,
Mm.
doing a marathon, and you can see the finish, you can see the finish line. And and luckily, I usually don't lose parts. I mean, there's so many little parts. Occasionally, I haven't had to redo things, but so it's all about collecting things, moving things around, getting them in just the right place. And that's the play. That's where the play comes in the end.
So do you get to the point where you are just putting it all together and you think, no, I need another bit here. I'll have to go away and make something?
Oh, yes, yes, that does happen.
Mm.
Yeah. And I'll look and say, boy, they really need something there. And
Yeah.
yeah, and that's easy. They can do that. See, things are just it's adaptable that way.
So you start off with a completely plain background and then everything else is added on top. Would that be correct?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Hmm. And everything is then secured down by hand.
Right. Uh-huh. Yes. Yeah.
That's quite an undertaking, isn't it? Some of your pieces are so beautifully intricate that you must be adding, oh, hundreds of pieces, I would think.
Yep, yep, yep. All those little leaves and well, they're like if I make a bush or a tree and I have all these individual leaves, so it will get to the point where it's a bush. So it has wire holding all the leaves together. And wire is another material that it's very, very important in my work. So that would be something that would be done in stump work as well. So I've had experiences, really kind of disasters, where I've used some cheap wire and it's rusted.
Oh, no.
And I've had to redo things and things have
Mm,
been ruined. So at some point I decided, oh, okay, I have to be more archival in my materials. So I,
mm,
I use jewelry wire and silver and copper and
mm.
so it's not going to rust. And
If somebody, which I'm sure you get every day, somebody wanted to try their hand at working in a similar style, do you have any suggestions for the best way of them making a start?
hmm. I think that well, I think that the people who would be interested would probably be experienced at doing some kind of craft or needlework first, and I
Mm,
think that's important. So it would really be about changing perhaps from a flat piece to giving something dimension. And so I would suggest starting by embellishing and adding things, beading or padded fabric, just to get used to having more 3 dimensions.
yeah.
And so that would be a good way to start. And also the wrapping of the wire, putting wire on things, and then because that brings a 3 dimensionality as well.
Yes, and I suppose that yeah, I suppose potentially you could do that even with a bought kit, couldn't you? If you were working maybe a kit that had something printed on the
Mhm.
background, there's nothing to stop you developing sections to move away from the background.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Mm.
Definitely, definitely. I think that there are 3D people and there are 2D people.
Mm.
And I think that the 3D people know they are, and they're just gravitated to that. But some people who've just done just the flat needlework might be intrigued by it too and really not know how much fun it is
Yeah.
until they try it. So I think I love having combinations of the flat and the 3D. That's why the bas relief format really works more than just sculpture in the round. That's a
Mm.
totally different way of approaching things. And that's
Yeah.
what attracted me to stump work in the first place.
Hmm.
It was a flat background.
So, what's next, Sally? Do you have things that are coming up? Do you have, a book in the pipeline? Do you have exhibitions in the pipeline? What's next on your agenda?
Well, I'm kind of at crossroads right now. I do have a few exhibits that I'm working on things for, and it takes it takes a lot of time doing the sort of promotional administrative part of what I do, keeping up my blog, doing interviews like this.
Oh, I'm sure it
It's
does.
just
Yeah.
like just reaching out, communicating with museums about exhibitions, and that takes up probably 50% of my time when it gets right down to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but I'm not going to do another children's book. I pretty much decided that. And it's mostly because of the time that it takes, that it would be a commitment of 2 to 3 years. And I have lots of other things I want to do and ideas. And I don't think I'll ever run out of ideas. So it's just being given an opportunity to show it. So for the exhibit I'm having in 3 years, I'm working on some things right now, and I'm not really exactly sure what I'm going to make, but I am sort of exploring some different ways of working, maybe in a little bit more 3D and larger scale, because my work is such small scale, it takes forever, and you can't really fill a whole gallery in maybe 20 years of work. You could fill a whole gallery,
Yeah.
but I'm trying to sort of enlarge the scale a little so that it will fill the gallery.
Do you actually have a framer that you use for framing your work, or do you do it yourself?
I have an in-house framer.
Oh, I think I might have met him today.
My husband, Rob, has been making my frames for 45 years that we've been together. He's an engineer by training, but he's a great woodworker. And he's got this design with cherry wood. It's sort of a shadow box frame, and it's the same design he's been doing. So when I have an exhibition, all the frames match. Everything looks the same. Maybe it's a little different aged wood, depending on how old it is. And so it's got a plexiglass front. It's got a little frame of wood inside that holds the plexiglass away from the artwork. And so the work is protected. So it protects it from light. So it's UV glass.
Yes.
And so dust and bugs and also curious fingers.
Yes, I
And
can imagine that's a big one when it's an exhibition.
yeah, and it's not just children who do that.
Oh, really?
The instinct is to reach out, because what I make it does make one think that this is to be played with. And that's what I like. I really like that fact that people feel they can play with it, but I don't want them to play with it physically, literally.
Yes, no, of course not, because everyone thinks they're the first person to ever do that, and by the time 50 people or 100 people have done it, your work's getting gradually oil from fingers and things, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and the glass does. Yeah, there's glare, and there's it is a separation from the real art, but I think that's the compromise that I have made, that and it works.
Yeah, I know there's always been, just thinking about more traditional stump work now, but the 3D aspect of it, there's always been a split in opinion whether you use glass in the frame or you didn't use glass. Because as you say, if you don't use glass, you can see it. But on the other hand, it's at the mercy of, well, elements, be it damp, be it people's fingers.
Yes, yeah, and any kind of needlework. That's the case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you'll be working on individual pieces going forward, on individual standalone pieces.
That's right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Do you have designs sort of planned ahead for those, or is that something you just come to as and when?
I have a sketchbook that I've been keeping for years, and whenever I think of something, I will jot down a little drawing, and sometimes I forget. that I've done that. So it's very helpful to go through this book and to see, oh yeah, I have this idea and that idea. Because if I have a void, then it will be filled. I mean, it's sort of like there's no sense of blankness or emptiness. It's like all I need is a window of time. And it's like before I know it, it's like, okay, we've got to do this and that. It's got to be filled. And sometimes it gets a little overwhelming. But
Yes.
so the sketchbook helps. I just have so many ideas. Some of them are very kind of, sort of reflecting the world we live in. I mean, so my work has been sort of child oriented, very kind of sweet and lovely. At some point, it must have been about 15 years ago, I thought I want to bring the real world into my art. I know that these little people I make can say so much more.
Yeah.
So I started doing more people from different cultures and these sort of collective portraits and doing a lot of research. I've always been interested in costumes and history. So that brought in these other interests into what I was doing. Also, I made a piece about refugees called Displaced. And so I'm affected by what's happening around me, but I can also sort of make the safe little world. It's like I can use this sort of comforting and precious medium to say something strong.
Yes. Yes.
And it's sort of like it's inviting. People don't feel like they are being assaulted when they look at a
Yes.
art. And they brought in, but so you can put messages in, you can say things. They're there. They're ready to hear what you have to say.
Yeah.
So in that way, I really enjoy the communicative aspect of making art. And I mean, if I had made art that was quicker, that went faster, I could see being a kind of illustrator who does more topical work.
Yes.
That is more in tune with what is happening now. But I can't respond quick enough to the way media works.
No, I suppose it would have to be a longer term trend, wouldn't it? Something that was recurring. I suppose, as you say, things like refugees or whatever, that obviously going on over a period of years rather than a quicker news story.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Sally, I can't believe that we have actually been speaking for over an hour now. It has been an absolute pleasure to be able to chat with you. And I'm sure that it will give so many people so much pleasure and so much inspiration. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity.